She mistook the millionaire heir for a regular worker, and he fell in love by accident. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Daniel Wentworth was the perfect example of a spoiled rich boy. At 27, he lived a luxurious life filled with parties and unlimited credit cards, all courtesy of his father, the billionaire electronics tycoon Richard Wentworth. Tired of his son's irresponsibility, Richard decided it was time for a reality check. He sent Daniel to work at one of his factories. The mission was clear. Daniel had to work like any regular factory employee, and no one could know who he really was, except the branch manager, Mr. Miller. The next morning, a bright red Porsche rolled into the parking lot of Wentworth Electronics in San Jose. It stopped right in the spot marked "Reserved for Forklift." The nearby employees paused for a second, and out stepped Daniel Wentworth, sunglasses on, looking full of himself. From the office window above, Mr. Miller let out a sigh. He was already bracing for the chaos. Only he knew who Daniel really was. To everyone else, this guy was just the new intern. Daniel was greeted by the welcome team and given the usual instructions. In the locker room, he spent 15 minutes just trying to figure out how to put on the factory uniform. He wore the shirt backwards, mistook the ID badge for a credit card, and even asked if there was a laundry service to remove a stain from his blazer. When he finally made it to the production floor, the disaster began. He tried to lift a box and almost knocked over an entire stack of components. Then he touched a panel switch without knowing what it did, and a security alarm went off for a few seconds. Everyone turned to look. Some tried not to laugh. That's when Isabella Lockhart showed up, a production technician, with her badge hanging around her neck and an amused smile on her face. She held a clipboard, but her expression said it all. She had already labeled Daniel as a walking disaster. "First day, rookie?" she asked, laughing as she watched him trying to hold the box like it was a ticking bomb. Daniel widened his eyes, offended. "Rookie? Do you even know who you're talking to?" Isabella raised an eyebrow and tilted her head. "Someone who can't tell the front from the back of a shirt. Am I right?" "Oh, and here's a tip," Isabella said, pointing with her chin toward the parking lot. "The forklift is very possessive about its spot." The nearby team burst out laughing. One of the workers, trying not to laugh too hard, added, "Welcome to the team, Prince of the Forbidden Parking Spot." Daniel, used to being treated like royalty, was stunned by their boldness. But Isabella had already made up her mind. That clumsy intern needed a guide, and she was going to be the one. The next morning, Daniel arrived determined to prove that his first day had just been beginner's bad luck. This time, he parked the Porsche in a regular spot, fixed his hair in the mirror, and walked confidently toward the factory entrance. Isabella was already waiting for him on the production floor. Holding a blue folder and wearing a smile that mixed amusement with a bit of maternal discipline. "Good morning, Prince of the Forbidden Parking Spot," she greeted, waving the folder. "Sleep well in your castle?" Daniel sighed, trying to keep his bored movie star look. "My name is Daniel, and yes, thank you for asking." "Oh, how polite." Isabella pretended to be amazed. "Well, Daniel, I have a surprise for you." She opened the folder and pulled out several stapled sheets. On the colorful cover, big bold letters read, "Survival Manual for Clumsy Newbies, First Edition, Author, Isabella Lockhart." Daniel blinked several times, speechless. "You wrote a manual? For me?" "For you, and for anyone who comes in thinking this place is an amusement park," Isabella replied, handing him the manual. "Think of it as a welcome gift." Daniel flipped through the pages, reading titles like Rule Number 1, Don't touch panels without knowing what they do. Rule Number 2, Don't wear expensive cologne near the thermal printer. And Rule Number 3, Never ever, under any circumstances, park in the forklift spot. "This is detailed," Daniel muttered, impressed despite himself. "And there's more," Isabella said, pointing to a specific page. "Check out Rule Number 7. When the alarm goes off, it's not your cue to start dancing." Nearby workers chuckled quietly. Jake, a senior technician, walked over curiously. "Isabella, did you seriously write a manual for the rookie?" "Jake, my friend, this is no ordinary rookie," Isabella said dramatically. "This is a special case. Allow me to officially introduce the Prince of Chaos." Daniel frowned. "Prince of Chaos? That sounds a bit dramatic, don't you think? Dramatic would have been if I'd called you the hurricane of confusion, Isabella replied with a mischievous smile, but I thought Prince suited your royal style better. The team burst into laughter. Daniel, used to being treated with respect, was momentarily speechless. No one had ever teased him like that, so boldly and affectionately. Isabella clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. All right, Prince, time for your first hands-on lesson. Your mission today? Organize these ID tags by numerical code. She pointed to a table covered in small white tags with printed numbers. Looks easy, Daniel said, confident. Looks can be deceiving, Isabella whispered to Jake, who was trying not to laugh. Daniel sat down and started sorting the tags. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. He worked methodically, creating small numbered piles. Isabella watched from a distance, arms crossed, like a teacher overseeing a student during a test. He's doing well, commented Sarah, a quality control employee. Just wait, Isabella replied, glancing at her watch. In 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, Daniel raised his hand. Isabella? What's the difference between code 2847A and 2847B? One's for high-voltage circuits, the other for low-voltage, she explained patiently. They must never be mixed. Oh, Daniel looked at the tags in his hands with a worried expression. And what if I already mixed, let's say, all of them? Isabella closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and walked over to Daniel's table. What she found was a full-blown festival of confusion, high-voltage tags mixed with low-voltage ones, critical component codes jumbled with regular spare parts, and an entire pile of tags he had simply given up on. Prince, Isabella said with forced calm, you've managed to create a new category of organization. Congratulations. Is that good or bad? Daniel asked, genuinely concerned. Well, let's say you invented organized chaos, Isabella replied, starting to separate the tags again. It's almost an art form. Jake came closer and took a look at Daniel's work. Man, how did you put 5,000-volt tags next to bike flashlight ones? Natural talent? Daniel shrugged. The whole team burst into laughter. Isabella shook her head, but her smile was genuine. All right, let's try something else. How about printing a few new tags to replace what we reorganized? She led him to a thermal printer in the corner of the room. Simple. You type the code here, choose the font here, and hit print. Easy as apple pie. Daniel nodded confidently and sat down at the computer. Isabella went back to her desk but kept an eye on him. 15 minutes later, Daniel called her again. Isabella? I think there's something wrong with the printer. She walked over and saw the computer screen. Daniel had selected the Comic Sans font to print industrial component tags. Prince, Isabella said slowly, are you planning to make factory labels look like birthday party invitations? Was Comic Sans not a valid option? Daniel asked, confused. I thought it would look friendly. Isabella looked at the printer, which had already produced about 50 tags in Comic Sans, all with serious electronic component codes written in a font that looked like a comic book. Sarah, Isabella called. You have to see this. Sarah came over, looked at the tags, and burst into uncontrollable laughter. Oh my goodness, they look like lunchbox labels. Soon, several employees gathered around the printer, looking at the Comic Sans tags like they were modern art. You've got to admit, Jake said, they're unique. Daniel, realizing he had caused another little disaster, braced himself to be scolded. But to his surprise, Isabella just turned off the printer and looked at him with an amused expression. You know what, Prince? In 15 years working here, I've never seen anyone turn industrial tags into something so creative. So I'm not fired? Daniel asked, relieved. Fired? Isabella pretended to think about it. No, you're way too entertaining to fire. Plus, I'm curious to see what other kinds of art you'll create. For the first time in his life, someone was laughing at Daniel, openly teasing him, and he didn't feel offended. On the contrary, there was something refreshing about that honesty. Isabella didn't treat him like some untouchable prince, but like a regular person who could make mistakes, learn from them, and even be the butt of a harmless joke. Isabella, Daniel said hesitantly, can I try again? The labels, I mean, with a font that's more appropriate? Of course, she answered, smiling. But first, let's add a new rule to the manual. Rule number 15, Comic Sans is banned in industrial settings. Daniel laughed, and in that moment, something shifted. For the first time, he didn't want to impress someone with money, charm, or his last name. He just wanted to do it right, to make Isabella smile like that again, but for a different reason. And that feeling was completely new to him. The lunch bell rang exactly at noon, and Daniel watched as the employees rushed away from their stations with a kind of urgency that looked almost desperate. Jake ran past him as if escaping a fire. "First rule of the cafeteria, Prince," Jake shouted over his shoulder. "Last one there gets the leftovers." Daniel looked around, confused. In his world, lunch meant reservations at expensive restaurants or silver trays served by butlers. The idea of racing for food was completely foreign to him. Isabella appeared at his side, swinging her badge keys like a bell. "Aren't you coming to lunch?" she asked, noticing his hesitation. "Of course I am," Daniel answered, trying to sound casual. "I'm just studying the environment." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Studying the environment? It's a cafeteria, Prince, not a museum. The food doesn't bite." She started walking toward the cafeteria, and Daniel followed, trying to maintain his usual confident posture. The factory's cafeteria was the complete opposite of everything he was used to. Plastic tables, mismatched chairs, and a counter where a friendly woman was serving food from giant pots. Daniel got in line behind Isabella, watching the other workers grab blue plastic trays and move down the line with ease. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the counter and studied the handwritten menu on a chalkboard hanging on the wall. Daniel murmured, frowning. "Where are the lactose-free options?" The woman at the counter, a lady named Betty, looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Lactose-free? Honey, we've got regular milk and sour milk. Which one do you want? And the gluten-free choices?" Daniel went on, ignoring the answer. "Do you have anything made with truffle oil?" Isabella, who was right behind him in line, began to chuckle softly. At first it was a quiet laugh, but it grew until she was laughing openly, holding her stomach. "Oh my goodness," Isabella managed to say between laughs. "You're joking, right?" Daniel turned to her, genuinely confused. "Joking about what?" "I'm just asking about the menu options." Isabella wiped tears from her eyes and stepped up to the counter, still laughing. "Betty, can you give me 2 of today's special burritos?" Betty smiled and prepared 2 huge burritos, wrapped in foil, placing them on cardboard plates along with fries and 2 diet sodas. Isabella took one of the plates and handed it to Daniel. "Here you go," she said with a playful smile. "This burrito has everything you asked for, and it even comes with diet soda." Daniel took the plate and examined the burrito like it was a newly discovered archaeological find. He turned it over, trying to understand what it was made of. "This is food?" he asked hesitantly. "It's a burrito, Prince." Isabella explained, trying not to laugh again. "Mexican food. You've never had a burrito?" "Well, I've had them at fancy Mexican restaurants," Daniel replied defensively, "but they didn't look like this." Isabella guided him to an empty table and sat down, watching Daniel continue to inspect the burrito. "Come on, try it," she encouraged. "I promise it's not poisonous." Daniel took a deep breath, like he was about to jump out of a plane, and took a cautious bite of the burrito. His expression went through several stages: surprise, confusion, a slight grimace, and then, unexpectedly, his eyes lit up. He chewed slowly, processing the flavors, and suddenly started to laugh. Not the polished, charming laugh he used at parties, but a real, spontaneous laugh. "I don't know what this is," Daniel said through laughter, still holding the burrito, "but it's amazing." The whole table burst out laughing. Isabella laughed so hard she nearly choked on her own bite. "He discovered the burrito," Jake announced to the entire cafeteria, which turned to watch the scene. "What's in here?" Daniel asked, examining the inside of the burrito. "Beans, rice, cheese, all together? And meat, peppers, lettuce, tomato," Isabella listed, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "It's basically a Mexican hug wrapped in a tortilla." Daniel took another bite, this time with more confidence. "A Mexican hug," he repeated thoughtfully. "I like that." Sarah, sitting at the next table, leaned forward. "Wait until you try Betty's Friday lasagna. That's a full Italian hug." "Friday?" Daniel asked, excited. "I'm already looking forward to it." Isabella watched Daniel as he shared his diet soda with her, offered fries to Jake and Sarah, and chatted enthusiastically about food like it was the most important discovery of his life. There was something different about him in that moment. "You know," Isabella said, accepting the soda he offered. You seem different when you're not trying to impress anyone. Daniel stopped chewing and looked at her, curious. What do you mean? Well, since this morning you seemed a little tense, like you were acting a part, Isabella explained. But now you seem more relaxed, more like yourself. Daniel thought about her words for a moment. It was true. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't calculating every move, every word, every expression. He was just being. Maybe it's the magical power of the burrito, Daniel suggested, taking another bite. Or maybe it's because you finally stopped trying to be the perfect prince and accepted being the prince of chaos, Isabella replied with a warm smile. Daniel laughed, and that's when something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but when he smiled at Isabella this time, there was no pose, no calculated charm, no intention to impress. It was simply an honest, genuine smile from someone who was truly enjoying himself. Isabella noticed the difference right away. That smile lit up his face in a completely new way, making him look younger, more approachable, more human. She smiled back, feeling something strange and warm spreading in her chest. Much better, she murmured, almost to herself. What? Daniel asked, still smiling. Nothing, Isabella replied quickly, feeling her cheeks flush. I was just thinking that your smile is much better when you're not trying to win someone over. Daniel stopped eating and looked at her for a moment, processing the comment. Was I trying to win someone over? Ever since you got here, you've had this movie star attitude, Isabella explained, gesturing. Too much perfectly styled hair, too many sunglasses, too much mysterious air. But now you seem like a real person. A real person who doesn't know how to eat a burrito, Daniel added, laughing. Exactly, Isabella agreed. And that's much more charming than any magazine pose. The rest of lunch flew by. Daniel asked about his coworkers' lives, laughed at Jake's jokes, complimented Betty's food, and even helped Sarah open a stubborn ketchup packet. When the bell rang, signaling the end of break, he looked at his watch, surprised. It's over already? He asked, genuinely disappointed. Time flies when you're not counting the minutes until you can leave, Isabella observed, standing up from the table. As they walked back to the production area, Daniel carrying his tray to return it, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about his smile. There was something about that moment of sincerity that had touched something in her heart. And Daniel, in turn, discovered something surprising. For the first time in a long time, he didn't want a moment to end. Not because of luxury, fancy fun, or status, but simply because he was enjoying the company of real people, having real conversations, sharing something as simple as a burrito. When they got back to the work area, Isabella turned to him. Ready for more training, Prince? Ready, Daniel replied, and his smile was still that same real smile. No performance. Isabella smiled back, feeling that something had definitely changed between them during that lunch. She walked over to a workstation in the corner of the room where several boxes were neatly arranged with electronic components. Colorful resistors, small capacitors, wires in various colors, and small circuit boards. All right, Prince, she said, clapping her hands to get Daniel's attention. Time to test your progress. Daniel stepped closer, still energized from the success of lunch. That genuine smile still lingered on his lips. What's the challenge now? He asked, rubbing his hands together as if preparing for something big. Isabella picked up a basic circuit board and a simple diagram. Let's see if you can build a basic panel using electronic components, she explained, pointing to the diagram. It's pretty simple. Just think of it as Legos for adults. Daniel studied the diagram, frowning with concentration. Looks easy, he said, sounding confident. Oh, but there's one important difference, Isabella added with a playful smile. If you make a mistake, it won't explode. It'll just become a meme. Jake, who was working at a nearby station, looked up, intrigued. Isabella's letting the prince handle electronics? I have to see this. Soon, several employees started gathering discreetly, pretending to tidy up their own workstations, clearly curious about what was about to happen. Isabella pulled out a chair for Daniel. Take a seat, young grasshopper. Your mission is to connect these components following this diagram, she said, pointing to the paper. Red resistor goes here, blue capacitor goes there, and the wires connect everything. Easy as apple pie. Daniel sat down and adjusted the chair like a surgeon preparing for delicate surgery, then began studying the diagram. All right, he murmured to himself. Red resistor. Here it is. He picked up a small red component and examined it from every angle, as if it were a rare diamond. Isabella leaned on the table nearby, watching him with growing amusement. Prince, it's just a resistor. It won't bite. I'm being careful, Daniel replied, focused. You said it wouldn't explode, but you didn't say if it bites. Sarah, who had come over to watch, began laughing softly. He's right, Isabella. You didn't say anything about biting. Daniel started connecting the first component to the board. So far, so good. The trouble began when he tried to follow the diagram for the second component. This blue wire goes here, he muttered, placing a wire in a completely random spot. Actually, Isabella tried to step in. The diagram shows it goes. No, Daniel interrupted, determined. Let me try it on my own first. I can do this. Isabella exchanged a playful look with Jake and decided to let him continue. Over the next 15 minutes, Daniel created something that defied every known law of electronics. He connected red wires where blue ones were supposed to go, placed resistors in completely random spots, and somehow managed to make a capacitor hang in the air, held only by a wire that seemed to defy gravity. How is that capacitor floating? Asked Tommy, a young technician who had stopped to watch. Natural talent, Daniel replied proudly, unaware he had created a physical impossibility. Isabella stood by silently, biting her lip to keep from laughing. Daniel's panel was becoming a piece of abstract art. It was colorful, had a strange kind of symmetry that almost made sense, and absolutely no practical function. Done, Daniel announced, standing up and admiring his creation. How does it look? Isabella looked at the panel, then at the diagram, then back at the panel. She blinked several times, trying to process what she was seeing. Well, she began slowly, you definitely created something unique. Is it functional? Daniel asked, eager. Isabella tilted her head, studying his work like an art critic examining a modern sculpture. Functional for what exactly? She asked, genuinely curious. For electronic stuff? Daniel offered, uncertain. Jake walked over and looked more closely at the panel. Man, this looks like modern art. If you put this in a gallery, someone would pay $5,000 thinking it's a statement about the complexity of modern life. Really? Daniel asked, excited. Really, Sarah confirmed, joining the group. You just created the company's first interactive sculpture with no practical function. Isabella finally lost it and started laughing. It wasn't mocking, but full of fun and disbelief. Prince, she managed to say between laughs, in 10 years working with electronics, I've never seen someone make a capacitor defy gravity. Daniel looked at his creation and instead of feeling embarrassed or upset began laughing too. I really made it float, didn't I? He said, clearly impressed with himself. You did something that should be physically impossible, Tommy confirmed, shaking his head in awe. And you know what's even more impressive? Isabella added. You're not mad or frustrated. Most people would be upset after failing so creatively. Daniel turned to her, still smiling. Can I try again? He asked, surprising everyone. Isabella blinked, caught off guard. Do you really want to try again? After that? She pointed at the electronic sculpture. I want to learn, Daniel replied, and there was something so sincere in his voice that the whole group fell silent for a moment. I know I did something completely wrong, but it was fun, and I want to understand how to do it right. Jake exchanged a meaningful glance with Sarah. It was rare to see someone react to failure with such good humor and a genuine desire to improve. You know, Jake said, most newbies get embarrassed when they mess up and try to hide it or make up excuses. Or they get mad and blame the diagram, Sarah added. Daniel shrugged. I can't blame the diagram for connecting wires the wrong way, and being embarrassed won't teach me how to get it right. Isabella felt something shift in her chest. There was something truly captivating about the way Daniel was handling failure. He wasn't using charm to escape the situation, and he wasn't trying to impress anyone with clever excuses. He was just being honest about not knowing and wanting to do better. All right, Isabella said, picking up a new circuit board. Let's try again, but this time I'll sit right here next to you and guide you step by step. Really? Daniel asked, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Really? But first, Isabella pointed to the earlier creation, we need to give your masterpiece a name. Suggestions, anyone? The flying capacitor, Tommy suggested. Electronic abstraction number 1, Sarah offered. What happens when a prince meets a diagram? Jake proposed, making everyone laugh. Daniel laughed too, and Isabella noticed something different about him. Behind the perfectly styled hair and the attitude of someone who never had to try for anything, there was someone starting to emerge. Someone who truly wanted to belong. Someone who wasn't afraid to mess up, to be the punchline, to be vulnerable. And that was far more attractive than any charming pose he could strike. The 5 o'clock bell rang throughout the factory, signaling the end of another workday. Daniel was putting away his tools at the bench when he realized his fingers were still slightly trembling from concentration. He had spent the last 3 hours trying to build basic circuits under Isabella's supervision, and though he still made mistakes, he had managed to get 2 panels working properly. "Nice work today, Prince," Isabella said, walking over with her backpack slung over one shoulder. "You almost didn't create any modern art in the last 2 hours." "Almost," Daniel repeated, laughing. "Is that progress?" "It's a miracle," she replied with a smile. "I mean, considering you started out making capacitors float, yes, it's definitely progress." Other employees began saying goodbye and heading out, but Isabella hesitated for a moment. "Hey, Prince," she said, adjusting the strap of her backpack, "are you in a hurry to leave?" Daniel looked around, as if expecting an answer to come from the silent machines. "In a hurry? No, not really." "Why?" "I want to show you something," Isabella said, walking toward a door Daniel had never noticed before. "Come with me." She led him up a narrow staircase at the back of the building. Daniel followed, curious, hearing his own footsteps echoing on the metal. "Where are we going?" he asked, holding onto the railing. "Patience, young grasshopper," Isabella replied over her shoulder. "Every great reveal needs suspense." They climbed 2 flights until they reached a heavy door marked Terrace, Maintenance Staff Only. Isabella pushed it open and gestured theatrically. "Welcome to my private office," she announced. Daniel stepped out onto the terrace and instantly understood why Isabella had brought him there. The view was breathtaking. From up there they could see all of San Jose stretching out to the horizon, with mountains in the distance painted in golden hues from the setting sun. "Wow," Daniel murmured, genuinely impressed. "This is amazing." "Right?" Isabella said, clearly proud of her discovery. "I found this spot on my second day here. I come up whenever I need to think or when the machines get too loud." She led him to a corner of the terrace where there were 2 old plastic chairs and a makeshift table made from a flipped box. "This is my personal Zen spot," Isabella explained, sitting in one of the chairs. "Nothing fancy, but it's got the best view in the city." Daniel sat in the other chair, still soaking in the landscape. "It's better than any fancy restaurant I've ever been to," he said, and there was a sincerity in his voice that made Isabella look at him with curiosity. "Really?" she asked. "A guy like you must know some incredible places." Daniel paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've been to expensive places," he corrected. "But this is different. It feels real." Isabella felt something stir in her chest at that answer, but she quickly decided to change the subject before the moment got too serious. "Speaking of real," she said, searching her backpack, "I have something for you." She pulled out a small electronics kit in a clear plastic box and handed it to Daniel. "A gift?" he asked, surprised. "A final challenge of the day?" Isabella corrected with a playful smile. "You have a mission. Make this little light blink. If you succeed, I might consider you a semi-functional employee." Daniel opened the box and found a few basic components: a small LED light, some wires, a tiny battery, and a resistor. "Semi-functional?" he repeated, pretending to be offended. "How generous of you." "Hey, I'm a woman with high standards," Isabella teased. "Semi-functional is practically a compliment coming from me." Daniel laughed and began examining the parts. The setting sun cast a golden glow, and he felt strangely relaxed up on the rooftop, far from the noise and pressure of the factory. "All right," he murmured to himself. "LED, battery, resistor, wires, like an electronic cake recipe." He started putting the circuit together, but his hands were shaking slightly. Whether from nerves or intense concentration, he couldn't tell. "Relax, Prince," Isabella said, noticing his tension. "It's just an LED, not a nuclear bomb." "I know," Daniel replied, trying to connect a wire. "But after the floating capacitor fiasco, I'm a little paranoid." One of the small parts slipped through his fingers and dropped to the floor. Daniel bent down quickly to pick it up, but tripped over his own chair and nearly fell. "Easy there, Fred Astaire," Isabella laughed, helping him regain his balance. "Fred Astaire danced. He didn't trip over plastic chairs," Daniel replied, cheeks flushed. "Details," Isabella said, waving her hand. With Isabella sitting beside him, offering the occasional tip, Daniel finally managed to connect all the components correctly. When he touched the last wire to the battery, the little LED light turned on and began blinking in a steady rhythm. "It works!" Daniel exclaimed, holding up the tiny circuit like it was an Olympic trophy. "Congratulations, you've officially reached semi-functional status," Isabella announced solemnly. Daniel watched the blinking light and, without meaning to, said something that surprised even him with its honesty. "I think the light is blinking in sync with my heartbeat." Isabella rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh great, now the prince is turning into a poet?" she joked, though her smile was warm and sincere. "Hey, that was a legitimate scientific observation." Daniel defended himself, laughing. "Sure, very scientific," Isabella replied sarcastically. "Next you'll be telling me the stars are aligning too?" They laughed together, and the moment naturally quieted down. The sun kept setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The little light kept blinking in Daniel's hand, creating a soothing rhythm. "You know," Isabella said softly, "you're not at all what I expected on the first day." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, curious. "On day one, I thought you were just another spoiled rich kid who'd never worked a real job," she admitted. "But you actually try, and you don't quit when you mess up." Daniel thought about that for a moment. "No one ever really gave me a real chance to try and fail," he said honestly. "Everything's always come too easy. This is new for me." "And do you like it?" Isabella asked. Daniel looked at the blinking light, then at the city view, and finally at Isabella. "I like it more than I ever thought I would," he admitted. The moment was simple, sincere, and magical. No luxury, no rush, no pressure. Just two people on a factory rooftop, sharing a sunset and a little blinking light that Daniel had managed to make work by himself. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he had found something money couldn't buy. The genuine satisfaction of achieving something on his own merit. The next morning, Daniel arrived just 5 minutes late, which Isabella considered a personal miracle. He seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less tense, and even his hair looked a little less perfect than usual. "Good morning, semi-functional employee," Isabella greeted him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Good morning to you too, unofficial boss," Daniel replied, accepting the coffee with a smile. As he took a sip, Isabella noticed something she hadn't picked up on in the past few days. The watch on Daniel's wrist was clearly expensive, very expensive, not something a regular intern would be wearing. "Nice watch," she said, trying to sound casual. "Where'd you get it?" Daniel looked at his own wrist like he was seeing the watch for the first time. "Oh, this? Found it on sale online," he said quickly. "You know how it is, sometimes a good deal just pops up." Isabella raised an eyebrow. That watch looked like a Rolex, and online sales on Rolexes weren't exactly common. "Must have been quite the deal," she murmured. Later that morning, while they were working side by side organizing components, Jake came over with a supplier contract for Isabella to sign. "Isa, can you take a look at this contract?" Jake asked. "It's from the new resistor supplier." Isabella took the paper and began reading, but Daniel, standing right beside her, glanced over her shoulder almost instinctively. "Those payment terms aren't great," he commented casually. 30 days is standard, but they're asking for 15. And that clause about late delivery penalties seems way too soft. Isabella and Jake both looked at him, surprised. "How do you know about contract terms?" Isabella asked. Daniel realized he had said too much and blushed slightly. "Oh, I watched a few business videos online," he said, trying to sound uninterested. "Just corporate reflex, you know." "Corporate reflex?" Isabella repeated slowly. "Where exactly were you working before this?" Daniel hesitated just a little too long. "I worked in a few different things. Nothing major." It was too vague, and Isabella noticed, but before she could press further, Daniel quickly changed the subject. "What about you, Isabella?" he asked. "Have you always worked with electronics?" "Don't change the subject so obviously, Prince," Isabella said, though her tone had a smile. But yes, I've always liked understanding how things work. My dad was a mechanic, so I grew up taking everything apart. Your dad must be proud to see you working here, Daniel said with genuine curiosity in his voice. He would be, Isabella answered, her voice softer now. He passed away 3 years ago, but he always said I had golden hands for fixing anything. Daniel stopped what he was doing and looked at her sincerely. I'm sorry, he was right about your golden hands. Thank you, Isabella murmured, feeling a warm sensation spreading in her chest. The moment was interrupted by Sarah, who walked over with a spreadsheet. Daniel, do you know anything about investments? She asked. I'm trying to figure out if it's worth putting money into the company retirement plan. Isabella expected Daniel to give a vague answer or ask for time to look it up, but instead, he immediately began explaining portfolio diversification, index funds, and long-term planning with a level of ease that left her speechless. But you have to consider the management fee, Daniel continued, and compare it with IRA options. Usually, funds with fees below 0.5% are better in the long run. Sarah nodded, impressed, and walked off to think it over. Isabella kept staring at Daniel. Where exactly did you learn about investments? She asked. Internet, Daniel replied quickly. There's a lot of educational content out there nowadays. Aha, Isabella said, clearly unconvinced. And commercial contracts? Also from the internet? YouTube's basically a full university, Daniel joked, but avoided her eyes. As the day went on, Isabella kept noticing little things that didn't add up. Daniel recognized expensive brands of equipment, spoke naturally about global economics, and once nearly signed a supplier contract without realizing it, only stopping when Isabella warned him. At lunch, they sat together as had become their habit. Daniel had brought a sandwich from home that looked like it had been made by a professional chef. Who made that sandwich? Isabella asked, eyeing the perfectly layered ingredients. I did, Daniel lied with a straight face. I like to cook. Isabella took a bite of her plain sandwich and watched Daniel eat his with the natural elegance of someone used to fine dining. Daniel, she finally said, can I ask you something personal? He stopped chewing, tense. Of course. Who are you, really? She asked, looking him straight in the eye. Daniel felt his heart race. For a moment, he almost told the truth. He almost spoke about his father, the fortune, everything. But then he thought about the way Isabella looked at him, how she laughed with him, how she treated him like a regular, valuable person. I'm just Daniel, he said softly, a guy trying to figure out where he fits in the world. Isabella studied his face for a long moment. There was honesty in that answer, even if she felt it wasn't the whole story. All right, she said finally. Just Daniel works for me. They shared a smile, and Isabella felt her heart do something strange in her chest. Part of her wanted to push, to uncover all the secrets Daniel was clearly hiding. But the other part, the part that was growing stronger each day, just wanted him to stay there, being that mysterious yet genuine Daniel who had become so important to her. Daniel, on his side, felt the weight of his secret heavier than ever. Every joke they shared, every knowing glance, every real connection made the lie hurt more. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be the owner's son. He didn't want to be the millionaire heir. He just wanted to be Daniel, the semi-functional worker who made Isabella smile. And that desire was starting to hurt in a way he had never felt before. Isabella, he said softly, thank you for giving me a chance. You're welcome, Prince, she replied, and her smile was warm and real. After all, everyone deserves a second chance at being semi-functional. They laughed together, but both could feel something deeper happening between them. Something neither of them was quite ready to name just yet. On Monday, Mr. Miller called a general meeting and announced that Robert Harrison, a major investor from Silicon Valley, would be visiting the factory on Friday. He was known for investing in tech startups and was coming to assess the company's operations. I want everything perfect, Miller declared, adjusting his glasses nervously. We can't afford to make a bad impression. Isabella immediately switched into full organizational mode. In the days that followed, she coordinated a deep cleaning, reorganized the workstations, and created a detailed schedule to make sure everything ran like a Swiss watch. Prince, she said to Daniel, on Friday, you'll be on the assembly line with the rest of the team. Important visitors don't need to know about our special rehab project for clumsy interns. Daniel laughed, but there was a tension in his eyes that Isabella couldn't quite figure out. "Sure, no problem," he replied. "I'll blend in perfectly with the crowd." On Thursday, Isabella noticed that Daniel was quieter than usual. During lunch, he barely touched his gourmet sandwich, disguised as homemade. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You seem a little worried." "Just thinking about some things," Daniel answered vaguely. "Sometimes life gets complicated, doesn't it?" "Hey, we're talking about the guy who made a capacitor float," Isabella joked, trying to cheer him up. "Your life can't be that complicated." Daniel forced a smile, but Isabella could tell he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. On Friday morning, the factory was spotless. Every machine gleamed, every workbench was organized, and all the workers wore clean, freshly pressed uniforms. Isabella had arrived 2 hours early to make the final adjustments. "Everything's perfect," she murmured to herself, checking her list for the 10th time. Daniel arrived at the regular time and went straight to the assembly line, as planned. Isabella noticed he seemed nervous, but she figured it was just the general pressure everyone was feeling. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black limousine pulled up in front of the factory. Robert Harrison stepped out of the vehicle with the confident posture of someone used to evaluating million-dollar companies. He was a tall man with graying hair and a suit that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly salary. Mr. Miller greeted him at the entrance, clearly nervous but trying to keep a professional composure. "Mr. Harrison, welcome to our San Jose branch," Miller said, extending his hand. "Thank you for having me," Harrison replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm looking forward to seeing your operations." Isabella watched from a distance as the group, Harrison, Miller, and 2 assistants, began their tour of the factory. She had planned every stop, every demo, every detail to make the best impression possible. Everything was going smoothly. Harrison asked smart questions about the processes, seemed impressed with the organization, and even smiled when Jake demonstrated a new soldering technique. They were approaching the assembly area, where Daniel was working, when Isabella felt a strange tension in the air. Daniel, who had been focused at his station, looked up when he heard voices getting closer. That's when it happened. Robert Harrison stopped abruptly when he saw Daniel. His face lit up with a genuine smile, and he walked straight toward him, completely ignoring Mr. Miller, who was trying to guide him to another area. "My goodness," Harrison exclaimed, reaching out enthusiastically. "Mr. Wentworth, it's an honor to see you again." The silence that followed was deafening. Every machine in the factory seemed to stop working at the same time. All the nearby workers froze, tools suspended in midair, eyes wide with surprise. Isabella blinked once, then twice, then several times in a row, as if that could change what she had just heard. "Mr. Wentworth?" she repeated softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Daniel went completely pale. He looked at Harrison, then at Isabella, then back at Harrison again, like a deer caught in headlights. Daniel began, but his voice faltered. "Richard told me you were getting some work experience here," Harrison continued, completely unaware of the awkwardness he had just caused. "What a remarkable initiative, learning the business from the ground up, really getting to know the operations. Your father must be so proud." Jake dropped a screwdriver. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed through the factory like a gunshot. Isabella felt like the world had stopped spinning. All the pieces of the puzzle began to come together with painful clarity. The expensive watch, his knowledge of investments, the contracts, how confident he was with business matters, the gourmet sandwiches, the way he talked about corporate life. "Wentworth," she whispered, and suddenly the company name on the factory entrance took on a whole new meaning. She had imagined Daniel could be many things, but never the owner's son. Mr. Miller tried to step in, clearly panicking. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps we should continue the tour." But Harrison was in his element, excited to have run into Daniel. No, this is perfect," he said, clapping his hands. "Seeing the future CEO working side by side with the employees, what a brilliant leadership strategy." Isabella felt her knees go weak. CEO, future CEO. The words echoed in her mind like a funeral bell. Daniel finally found his voice, but it came out as a rough whisper. "Mr. Harrison, maybe this isn't the best moment to—" "Nonsense," Harrison interrupted. "I'm truly impressed by your dedication. Richard always said you had potential, but seeing you here, actually working, that's real leadership." Isabella looked around and saw that all the workers were staring back and forth between Daniel and herself, as if watching a movie in slow motion. Sarah's mouth was hanging open. Tommy was shaking his head slowly. Jake looked like he was trying to solve an impossible math problem. The realization hit Isabella like a ton of bricks. The clumsy intern she had trained, teased, taught how to eat a burrito, called Prince of Chaos, was literally a prince. The prince of the entire place. She didn't know whether to laugh at the cosmic irony of the situation, cry from the embarrassment of having treated the future owner of the company like a lost child, or scream from the anger of being so completely fooled. "Isabella," Daniel said softly, taking a step toward her. She looked at him, and in that moment, everything they had shared over the past few weeks took on a new and painful meaning. Every laugh, every moment on the terrace, every honest conversation had been built on a lie. "You," she said, her voice trembling between shock and something that could have been either anger or hurt, "you're—" "I can explain," Daniel said quickly. Isabella slowly shook her head, still trying to process the weight of the revelation. "The owner's son," she murmured, "the future CEO, the Prince of Chaos is an actual prince." And with that realization, Isabella felt like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. For a moment that felt like forever, Isabella stood there, staring at Daniel like he was a complete stranger. The noise of the factory had gradually returned, but there was a tension in the air that everyone could feel. "Isabella," Daniel tried again, taking another step toward her. But Isabella was already moving. Without saying a word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit of the production area. She didn't run, didn't make a scene. She just left, with the determination of someone who urgently needed fresh air. "Isabella, wait," Daniel called, but she didn't look back. Robert Harrison, finally realizing he had walked into some kind of situation, looked confused as he glanced between Daniel and the figure walking away. "Did something happen?" he asked Mr. Miller. Miller, sweating nervously, tried to quickly take control of the situation. "Don't worry, Mr. Harrison. Let's continue the tour over here," he said, steering the investor away from the commotion. Daniel tried to follow Isabella, but Jake quietly stepped in his way. "Man, maybe give her a little space," Jake suggested softly. "But I need to explain," Daniel protested. "Explain what?" Sarah appeared beside them, arms crossed. "That you're the owner's son and you were just pretending to be one of us?" "That's not how it was," Daniel said, defending himself. "No?" Tommy joined the group, clearly amused. "Because from where I'm standing, the Prince of Chaos really is a prince." The other employees began to gather, whispering among themselves. Some looked like they thought the whole thing was hilarious. Others clearly felt betrayed or confused. "He fooled us," murmured a woman from quality control. "Honestly, it's kind of genius," said another. "The future CEO actually learning how the factory works." "Poor Isabella," Sarah shook her head. "She must feel so foolish for giving orders to the future boss." Daniel listened to the comments like they were daggers. Every word confirmed his worst fears about how people would react to the truth about him. When the tour finally ended and Robert Harrison left, Daniel searched the factory for Isabella. She had simply disappeared. He asked several employees, but no one knew where she was. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Daniel tried to keep working like normal, but he couldn't focus. Every time someone looked at him, he wondered if they were seeing Daniel, or the owner's son. When the shift ended, he rushed to the parking lot, hoping to catch Isabella as she was leaving, but she was already gone. That night, alone in his apartment in Malibu, Daniel picked up his phone and dialed Isabella's number. It rang several times before going to voicemail. "Isabella, it's me," he said after the beep. "Please, give me a chance to explain. I know you must be really upset, but please, call me back." He waited an hour, nothing. Then he sent a text message. "I can explain everything. Please give me a chance." 2 hours later, still no reply. Daniel paced around the house, restless and frustrated. He had never cared this much about what someone thought of him. All his life, if someone got mad at him, he would just move on. There were always other people, other fun, other distractions, but Isabella was different. what she thought actually mattered in a way he didn't fully understand. That's when he noticed the small electronics kit on the coffee table. The one they had worked on together up on the terrace. He had brought it home as a memory of that special moment. An idea came to him. If he could rebuild the circuit by himself, maybe it would help him think about how to fix things with Isabella. Daniel sat on the couch and carefully took the kit apart. He was sure he remembered how to put it back together. After all, Isabella had explained every step so clearly. He picked up the little LED light and connected it where he thought it belonged. Then he took the resistor and placed it where he believed it should go. He connected the wires based on his memory of what they had done together. When he was done, he connected the battery and nothing. The light didn't turn on. "That's strange," he murmured, checking the connections. He tried again, this time switching the resistor's position. Still nothing. On the third try, he used a completely different setup. The light blinked once, then died. "Almost," he said to himself, feeling encouraged. But on the fourth, fifth, and sixth attempts, nothing worked. Every combination he tried ended in total failure. Daniel leaned back on the couch, staring at the components scattered across the coffee table, and let out a long sigh. "Without you, nothing works," he whispered, as if the pieces in front of him could understand. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the son of an electronics tycoon, and he couldn't even get a tiny LED to light up. But it wasn't just about the circuit. It was about everything. Without Isabella guiding him, teaching him, laughing with him, and correcting him when he messed up, nothing seemed to work. Not electronics, not his job, not himself. For the first time in his privileged life, Daniel Wentworth was facing a problem he couldn't solve with money, charm, or family connections. He had lost the trust of someone who truly mattered, and there was no shortcut to earning it back. He tried calling Isabella once again. Voicemail. "Isabella," he said, his voice more vulnerable this time. "I know I messed everything up. I should have told you the truth from the start. But please, don't give up on me. I'm still the same guy you taught how to eat a burrito, the one who made a capacitor float. I'm still the Prince of Chaos who needs your help not to blow up the factory." He paused, looking at the broken electronics kit. "And apparently, I still need your help to make a simple light blink." Daniel hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of his ridiculously expensive apartment. For the first time, all that luxury felt empty and meaningless. He had discovered something more valuable than any inheritance. The feeling of being appreciated for who he truly was, not for what he owned. And now he had lost it, because he hadn't been brave enough to be honest from the beginning. In that moment, Daniel realized he'd have to do something he had never done before, earn a second chance, instead of simply expecting it to be handed to him. But first, he had to figure out how to do that without it seeming like he was using his status or money to force forgiveness. It was the hardest challenge he had ever faced, and for the first time in his life, there was no instruction manual to follow. Saturday arrived like slow torture for Daniel. He'd spent all of Friday at the factory being expertly avoided by Isabella. Every time he tried to approach her, she mysteriously had to check something urgent on the other side of the building. When he headed to the electronics section, she moved to the supply room. When he tried to catch her in the cafeteria, she had apparently decided to start fasting. "She's dodging me with GPS-level precision," Daniel complained to Jake during lunch. "Man, she could teach tactical evasion to the army," Jake replied, clearly amused. "I saw her walk all the way around the factory just to avoid your workstation." Sarah, sitting at the next table, leaned in to join the conversation. "Yesterday she asked me to go fetch some parts from storage. When I got back, I found out the parts were on her desk the whole time. She just wanted an excuse to leave when she saw you coming." Daniel sighed dramatically. "I need to talk to her. How am I supposed to explain anything if she doesn't stay in one place for more than 5 seconds?" "Maybe you should try a different approach," Tommy suggested. "Like, find out where she goes after work." Daniel looked like he was giving that some thought. "Wouldn't that be a little stalkerish?" "Not if your intentions are honest and romantic," Sarah offered. "Then it's more like a romantic ambush." "A romantic ambush," Daniel repeated, thinking, "that sounds better than stalker." Jake laughed. Man, you know you're desperate when romantic ambush sounds like a solid plan. After some quiet investigation, Daniel learned through Betty from the cafeteria that Isabella often went to a coffee shop called a Coffee Corner in Santana Row after work. Betty had mentioned it casually while talking about how Isabella always asked her to pack a slice of carrot cake from that cute little place where she gets coffee. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel parked his car across the street and watched the cafe like a private detective. He felt a bit ridiculous, but his determination to talk to her outweighed the embarrassment. At 4:30, he saw her walk into the cafe. She was wearing jeans and a casual top, her hair down, and she looked more relaxed than she had in days at the factory. Daniel took a deep breath, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and decided this was it. He crossed the street with determination, but the moment he opened the cafe door, his nerves got the better of him. He walked in too fast, didn't notice a customer coming out carrying a tray with 4 coffees, and nearly caused a slow-motion collision. "Watch out!" the man yelled, trying to juggle the tray. "Sorry, I'm so sorry." Daniel apologized over and over, trying to steady the drinks. "Is everything okay? Did anything spill?" The little incident had already caught the attention of half the cafe. People were watching with that curious look you give when unexpected entertainment walks in. Isabella, sitting at a table in the corner, looked up from her book and immediately rolled her eyes when she saw Daniel. "Oh no," she muttered to herself. Daniel, finally free from the tray-carrying man, looked around for Isabella and spotted her. He walked toward her with the grace of someone who had just been part of an awkward scene. "Isabella," he said as he reached her table. "Daniel," she replied coldly, closing her book and crossing her arms. "What an amazing coincidence to run into you here." "Okay, it wasn't a coincidence," he admitted, noticing that several people were still watching. "I needed to talk to you." "Here? In front of everyone?" Isabella gestured discreetly toward the nearby tables, where customers were pretending not to listen but clearly catching every word. "I tried to talk to you at the factory, but you—" Daniel made a gesture like someone running. "You ran away from me all day." "I didn't run," Isabella protested. "I was busy." "Busy avoiding eye contact," Daniel countered. An older woman at the next table whispered something to her husband, who immediately turned his head to get a better look at the conversation. Daniel realized he had an audience and figured if he was going to make a scene, he might as well be honest about it. "Isabella," he began, his voice growing more serious, "I lied about who I was." The noise level in the cafe noticeably dropped. Even the barista stopped frothing milk to listen. "I know," Isabella replied, trying to keep her voice down. "But it wasn't out of malice," Daniel went on, ignoring the fact that he was making a very public confession. "It was because, with you, I could just be me." Isabella tried to keep a stern expression, but Daniel noticed her eyes flicker for a moment. "For the first time in my life," he continued, stumbling a bit over the words, "I wasn't just a last name. I wasn't a bank account. I wasn't somebody's famous son. I was just Daniel." The cafe was now completely silent. Even the espresso machine had stopped making noise. "Daniel who didn't know how to eat a burrito," he added, a nervous smile forming. "Daniel who made capacitors float. Daniel who needed a survival manual for clumsy employees." Isabella felt her resolve start to soften, but she tried to hold her ground. "And you thought I didn't deserve to know the truth?" she asked. "I was scared," Daniel admitted. "Scared that you'd stop looking at me the same way. Scared you'd stop laughing at my mistakes. Scared you'd start treating me like everyone else does." "Like everyone else?" Isabella asked, genuinely curious in spite of herself. "Like I'm special because of my dad's money," Daniel explained. "Like every word I say must be wise just because I have an inheritance. Like I'm not allowed to make mistakes because rich people don't mess up. They just make bad investments." Despite herself, Isabella almost smiled at that last comment. The lady at the next table whispered loudly to her husband, "This is better than those afternoon soap operas." Daniel heard the remark and glanced around, realizing there were at least 10 people listening to every word. "Maybe we should," he started. "No," Isabella interrupted, a spark of amusement appearing in her eyes for the first time since the reveal. "You started this public drama, so finish it." Daniel swallowed hard and decided to keep going. Isabella, I know I messed up. I should have told you the truth from day one, but these past few days, they've been the best of my life. Not because of the job, or the factory, or learning about electronics. He paused, gathering courage. It was because of you. Because of the way you looked at me when I finally did something right. Because of the way you laughed when I got it wrong. Because of how you treated me like a regular person. Isabella studied his face for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he rarely showed. Finally, she sighed and, with a playful smile that made Daniel's heart skip a beat, said, "Now are you going to buy my coffee, Prince?" The tension in the cafe dissolved instantly. Laughter spread across nearby tables, and even the barista smiled and went back to work. "I'll buy your coffee for the next 10 years if you forgive me," Daniel replied, relieved. 10 years? Isabella raised an eyebrow. "For all the drama you caused, I think 15 sounds more fair." "Deal," Daniel said without hesitation. Isabella finally gave a real smile, and Daniel felt like he could breathe again for the first time in 2 days. The following Monday, Daniel arrived at the factory prepared to face the consequences of his very public revelation. He had spent all of Sunday wondering how his coworkers would treat him now that everyone knew who he really was. What Daniel didn't expect was to find Jake at the entrance, holding a phone and laughing uncontrollably. "Man, you have to see this," Jake said, walking over with the phone. "You've become a legend around here." Daniel looked at the screen and saw a video of himself from the previous week, carrying a box completely the wrong way, nearly knocking over an entire stack of components. The video had been edited with a funny soundtrack and subtitles that read, "When you lie on your resume but get the job anyway." "Who made this?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Tommy," Jake replied, still laughing. "He's got a talent for editing. Just wait until you see the others." "Others?" Daniel swallowed hard. As he walked through the factory, he noticed that several employees were looking at him differently. Not with anger or resentment as he had feared, but with a mix of amusement and something that felt like affection. Sarah came up to him in the production area. "Daniel, you have to see your meme compilation," she said, barely holding back her laughter. Tommy made a whole series. She showed another video. Daniel in the cafeteria asking if there were any truffle oil options, edited with dramatic sound effects, and the caption, "When royalty visits McDonald's." "I look ridiculous," Daniel murmured. "You look adorable," Sarah corrected. "That's why everyone likes it. It's not mean-spirited. It's affectionate." Tommy showed up, holding his own phone. "Hey, Prince, want to see my masterpiece?" he asked excitedly. "It's you trying to assemble that control panel. I edited it with classical music, like a National Geographic documentary about human evolution." Daniel watched the video of himself randomly connecting wires, with a made-up narration layered on top. Here we see the young prince in his natural habitat, attempting to master the ancient art of basic electronics. To his own surprise, Daniel started laughing. "This is actually really funny," he admitted. "Right?" Tommy said proudly. "And the best part is, you're not mad. Most bosses would be furious if they became a meme." "Well, technically I'm not anybody's boss yet," Daniel pointed out. "And besides, you're right, I really was ridiculous." Isabella approached the group with a smile Daniel couldn't quite read. "Good morning, internet celebrity," she said. "I saw you've become a star on our internal social media." "Isabella," Daniel said, still unsure where they stood after the conversation at the cafe. "About yesterday." "Yesterday, you bought me coffee and carrot cake," Isabella interrupted. "We're even, for now." Daniel smiled, relieved. Her tone was much lighter than it had been in recent days. "Good, because I need your help with a project." "Project?" Isabella raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" "It's a surprise," Daniel said, trying to sound mysterious. "Do you trust me?" Isabella pretended to think deeply. "Considering your track record with electronics? Not exactly, but I'm curious enough to supervise and make sure you don't electrocute anyone." Throughout the morning, Daniel secretly worked on a special electronic panel, with Isabella watching his every move. "What exactly are you trying to do?" she asked, seeing him connect LEDs in a specific pattern. "You'll see," Daniel replied, focused. "Just tell me if I'm connecting the right wires to the right places." "That blue wire should go there," Isabella pointed out. And make sure the resistor is in the right spot, or it'll burn everything. It took nearly 2 hours, but Daniel finally finished his secret project. It was a panel with several LEDs connected in a way that, when turned on, would form words. "Done," he said, breathing heavily. "Now, can you flip that switch over there?" Isabella looked at the panel suspiciously. "If this explodes, you're doing my laundry for a month," she warned. "Deal," Daniel agreed. When Isabella flipped the switch, the LEDs lit up in sequence, forming the words, "Will you be my girlfriend?" The entire factory seemed to stop. Workers from all over started gathering to see what was going on. Jake whistled, impressed. "Man, this is better than any romantic movie I've ever seen," he said. Isabella turned bright red, but she couldn't hide the smile spreading across her face. "Seriously?" she asked. "You're asking me out with an electronic panel?" "Well," Daniel said, nervous, "you always said I needed to learn how to make things actually work. This one works, right?" Isabella looked at the panel, then at Daniel, then at the whole team gathered around them, clearly waiting for her answer. "You realize that if I say no, you'll be the guy who got turned down in front of an electronic panel, right?" she said, trying to keep a serious tone. "I realize that," Daniel replied, "but I thought it was worth the risk." Tommy raised his phone. "This is definitely going to become a meme," he muttered. Isabella let out a dramatic sigh. "Well, I have a few conditions," she said. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Conditions? First, you'll keep being my intern until I decide you've graduated from the clumsy employee rehab program." "Agreed," Daniel said quickly. "Second, no special treatment just because you're the owner's son. If you mess up, I'll correct you in front of everyone, just like I always have." "Agreed," Daniel repeated. "Third, you'll teach me how to make that gourmet sandwich you bring every day. Because there's no way you're making that yourself." Daniel laughed. "Deal. Any other conditions?" Isabella pretended to think for a moment, clearly enjoying the suspense she was creating. "Just one more," she said, taking a step closer to Daniel. "You have to promise you'll never lie about who you are again. Because I like the real Daniel, electronic flaws and all." "I promise," Daniel said, his voice turning more serious. Isabella smiled and, without warning, gave him a quick but meaningful kiss. "Accepted," she said. "But you're still my intern, and you still have a lot to learn." The whole factory burst into applause and whistles. Jake shouted, "Finally!" Sarah clapped excitedly, and Tommy was already recording everything for the next video. "Best relationship proposal in factory history," declared Betty, who had come out of the cafeteria to see what the commotion was about. Daniel held Isabella's hand, still in disbelief that it had worked. "So technically, you're now my boss and my girlfriend?" he asked. "Technically, you're still the Prince of Chaos who doesn't know the difference between high-voltage and low-voltage wires," Isabella replied. "So yes, I'm definitely still your boss." The team laughed, and Daniel realized that, for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he wanted to be. Surrounded by people who liked him for who he was, not for what he had, with a girlfriend who wasn't afraid to put him in his place, and with a future he'd have to build with his own hands. It was both scary and exciting, and definitely better than any life of luxury and privilege he had lived before. 2 weeks after the electronic proposal, life at the factory had settled into a new routine. Daniel and Isabella worked side by side, with her supervising his progress, while he showed a level of dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. On Thursday morning, Daniel was focused on assembling a complex control panel when Isabella walked up with a concerned look on her face. "Prince," she said, "we have a situation. Mr. Miller just told me your father is on his way, right now." Daniel almost dropped the resistor he was holding. "My dad? Here? He didn't say anything about coming. Apparently, he wanted to make a surprise visit," Isabella explained. "Miller's in total panic. He wants you to act like the owner's son." Daniel looked at the half-finished panel in front of him, then back at Isabella. "What if I don't want to?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Isabella frowned. "What if I want him to see me exactly like this? Working, learning, being this." Daniel gestured to himself, wearing the factory uniform with a small solder stain on his shirt. Isabella studied his face for a moment. "Are you sure? Because your father's probably expecting to find you in some executive office, not assembling electronic panels." "I'm sure," Daniel replied, going back to his work. If he wants to see me, he's going to see who I really am now." 15 minutes later, Richard Wentworth walked into the factory with the commanding presence of a man who had built an empire. He was tall, with neatly combed gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than a new car. Mr. Miller followed him, clearly nervous, trying to guide him toward the offices. "Mr. Wentworth, if you'd like to go up to my office, I can call Daniel to join us," Miller suggested. "Actually," Richard said, stopping and looking around the production area, "I'd like to see how the operations work first. Where's my son?" Miller discreetly pointed to where Daniel was working, focused on his panel, with Isabella beside him offering guidance. Richard watched for a moment, clearly surprised. He had expected to find Daniel in some office, delegating tasks or, at worst, pretending to work. He hadn't expected to see him truly focused on a technical task, slightly sweating from concentration. "Interesting," Richard murmured, walking toward them. Daniel noticed him approaching and looked up. When he saw his father, his first reaction was tension, but he quickly forced himself to stay calm. "Hi, Dad," he said simply, without stopping what he was doing. "Daniel," Richard replied, observing the scene. "May I ask what you're doing?" "Building a control panel for line 3, Daniel explained, showing the project. "Isabella's teaching me about integrated safety circuits." Richard looked at Isabella, who remained professional but clearly protective of Daniel. "And you are?" Richard asked. "Isabella Lockhart, production technician," she answered, extending her hand. "An unofficial supervisor of your son." "Supervisor?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Someone has to make sure he doesn't electrocute anyone," Isabella said with a smile. "He's improved a lot, but he still needs constant supervision." Jake, working at the bench nearby, couldn't resist. "You should have seen him on the first day, Mr. Wentworth. He almost took down half the factory trying to carry a box." "Jake," Daniel protested, though he was smiling. "It's true," Sarah joined in. "And you should see the videos Tommy took. Daniel became our official meme." Richard watched the interactions with growing surprise. There was something natural, a genuine sense of camaraderie between his son and the employees that he had never seen before. "Daniel," Richard said, "can I speak with you in private?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at Isabella. "Go," she encouraged him. "Your panel will still be here when you get back." Father and son walked to a quieter area of the factory. "Well," Richard began, "this wasn't exactly what I expected to find." "What were you expecting?" Daniel asked. "Honestly, I expected to find you pretending to work, counting the minutes until you could go back to Malibu," Richard admitted. "But you seem different." "I am different," Daniel confirmed. "How so?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "For the first time in my life, I wake up in the morning knowing I have something important to do. Something only I can do because I've learned how to do it." Richard looked at his son's face, noticing a maturity that hadn't been there before. "And you want to stay? Here?" "I do," Daniel answered without hesitation. "I know this wasn't the original plan, but, Dad, I like who I've become here. I like working with my hands, solving real problems, being part of a real team." "And the young lady, Isabella?" Richard asked with a knowing smile. Daniel blushed slightly. "She's special. But it's not just because of her. It's everything." He gestured toward the factory. "For the first time, I feel like I've earned what I have because I worked for it." Richard stayed quiet for a long moment, taking in his son's words. "You know you're still my heir, right?" he finally said. "One day, all of this will be yours anyway." "I know," Daniel replied. "But when that day comes, I want to be ready. I want to truly understand the business, not just the numbers on a spreadsheet." Richard smiled, and it was a genuine smile of pride. "I'm impressed," he admitted, "and proud, very proud." They returned to the production area, where Isabella was still working on Daniel's panel. "Isabella," Richard said to her, "may I have a word?" Isabella looked nervously at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Of course, Mr. Rambat Wentworth." "I'd like to thank you," Richard said plainly. "Thank me?" Isabella looked confused. "For seeing potential in my son when he couldn't see it himself, for being patient with him, for helping him become this." He gestured toward Daniel, who was now back to work with renewed energy. Isabella smiled. "He did all the hard work, Mr. Wentworth. I just guided the process a little." "Well," Richard said, "I'd like to talk with you about a promotion. This company needs people like you in leadership roles." Isabella blinked, surprised. A promotion? Talent development supervisor, Richard explained, with a special focus on mentorship and onboarding programs. Interested? Isabella looked at Daniel, who was beaming with happiness for her. Very interested, she replied. That afternoon, as Richard got ready to leave, he pulled Daniel aside for one last conversation. Son, he said, I'm proud of the person you've become. And that Isabella, she's special. She's amazing, Daniel agreed. She helped me figure out who I really am. Then don't let her get away, Richard advised with a smile. And keep working hard. The world needs more leaders who understand the value of honest work. As he watched his father leave, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had found not only love, but purpose. And for the first time in his life, he was genuinely looking forward to whatever the future held. 6 months had passed since Daniel began his journey at the factory. What started as a punishment from his father had turned out to be the best decision of his life. He and Isabella worked side by side every day, she in her new role as talent development supervisor, and he learning every aspect of the business with a level of dedication that surprised everyone. On Friday, the workday had ended, and Isabella was gathering her materials when her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Meet me on the rooftop. Urgent. It's a matter of life or death, or coffee. Isabella raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Daniel had left the factory 15 minutes earlier, saying he forgot something in his car. Curious and slightly concerned, she climbed the stairs to the rooftop that had become their special spot. When she opened the door, she was completely speechless. The sunset painted the sky in golden and rosy shades, casting a magical light over the whole scene. There were small electric candles scattered on the rooftop floor, twinkling lights strung along the railing, and a makeshift electronic sign behind Daniel spelling out a message in glowing LEDs. Isabella read the message and immediately burst out laughing. Are you asking me to marry you or to hunt me down, Prince? She said, pointing to the sign that read, Will you marry me? Except Mary was misspelled with a flickering letter. Daniel, already down on one knee in a clearly rehearsed pose, turned bright red and glanced behind him, realizing the mistake. Oh no, he muttered, trying to get up and fix the sign without ruining the romantic setup. In his panic, he almost dropped the little velvet box in his hands. It slipped from his fingers and rolled across the rooftop floor, stopping dangerously close to a drainage grate. No, no, no. Daniel dove to the ground to catch the box before it vanished, crawling across the floor in the least graceful way possible. Isabella was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Daniel, breathe, she said between laughs. The box isn't going to run away. Daniel finally retrieved the box and stood up, his hair a complete mess and a dust mark on his shirt. I wanted it to be perfect, he said, trying to fix his hair with one hand while holding the box with the other. But I guess with me, it only works if it's chaotically perfect. Isabella stepped closer and gently smoothed his hair. Chaotically perfect is exactly how I like it, she said, smiling warmly. Daniel took a deep breath, knelt down again, this time ignoring the broken sign, and opened the box. The ring was simple and elegant, not flashy or extravagant, but there was something special about it. Isabella picked it up to get a closer look and saw a small engraving on the inside. Prince of Chaos and Queen of Patience. You're unbelievable, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Unbelievably lucky if you say yes, Daniel replied, his voice trembling slightly. Isabella Lockhart, will you be the one to fix my daily short circuits for the rest of our lives? Isabella laughed through her tears, looking at the man kneeling in front of her. The same man who had parked his Porsche in the forklift spot, who made capacitors float and turned industrial labels into comic art. The same man who had become her best friend, her greatest challenge bat, and the love of her life. I will, she said, reaching out so he could slip the ring onto her finger. Daniel stood up and kissed her under the golden sunset. At that exact moment, as if it had been perfectly timed, the electronic sign behind them finally worked properly. The flickering letters stopped, and the misspelled word mysteriously corrected itself from Mary with a Z to Mary with an S. Isabella pulled back from the kiss and looked at the sign, surprised. How did you do that? She asked. I didn't do anything, Daniel replied, confused. Maybe even the factory's happy for us. They laughed together, and Isabella realized that this imperfect moment had been more perfect than any elaborate proposal ever could have been. 3 months later, the wedding was exactly how Isabella had always wanted it. Simple, intimate, meaningful, and in the place that had brought their lives together. The factory. The cafeteria had been transformed into a party hall by the employees themselves. White balloons were tied to the chairs, simple but beautiful flowers decorated the tables, and a handmade banner by Betty hanging on the wall read, "Long live the Prince of Chaos and his Queen." Daniel walked in nervous but glowing, wearing a suit that, true to his style, had a slightly crooked tie despite Jake's multiple attempts to fix it. Isabella appeared in a delicate, simple dress made by a seamstress who was a friend of her mother. She looked absolutely radiant, proving she didn't need luxury to be the most beautiful bride in the world. Jake served as best man, and Sarah was the maid of honor. Tommy, of course, was the official videographer, promising to create the most romantic wedding meme in history. When the improvised officiant, Mr. Miller himself, who had gotten an online license, asked if they took each other as husband and wife, they both answered, "I do," with huge smiles. The moment they kissed as husband and wife was marked by employees throwing confetti made from old, recycled reports, now colorfully shredded. The kiss was followed by enthusiastic applause, loud whistles from Jake and Tommy, and even the unexpected sound of a test siren, which went off when someone accidentally bumped into the control panel. Daniel hugged Isabella and whispered in her ear, "This was the first project in my life that went right from start to finish." Isabella laughed and replied, "Oh no, you still have a lot to learn, Prince. But now I'll teach you as your wife." Richard Wentworth, who had insisted on paying for the party despite the couple's protests, watched from a distance with a proud smile. His son had found not just love, but purpose and true happiness. Betty brought out a cake she had made especially for the occasion, decorated with tiny blinking LEDs, working perfectly for once, and the phrase, "Happily ever after, no short circuits." And so, with joyful tears, laughter echoing through the cafeteria, and lots of love, began the new life of Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Wentworth. Chaotic, funny, real, and completely happy. They had proven that sometimes the best romances start with misunderstandings, grow through patience and humor, and end with the certainty that you've found not just a romantic partner, but a life partner, someone who accepts every flaw and still finds a reason to laugh with you. The Prince of Chaos had finally found his Queen of Patience, and together they were ready to build a life full of love, laughter, and, inevitably, a few more crazy electronic adventures. What did you think of Isabella and Daniel's story? Let us know in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and don't forget to check out more emotional stories by clicking here at the end screen.